Eldrin wasn't your typical sorcerer. He didn't cackle. He rarely wore dark robes, preferring comfortable yet slightly threadbare tunics. Tower wasn't perched on a jagged peak, but rather nestled discreetly in a quiet forest clearing, half hidden by ancient oak trees. And the reason he was attempting to summon a demon? Well, it wasn't for world domination or untold riches. It was for a much simpler, more pathetic reason. He was profoundly, utterly lonely. For years, Eldrin had studied the ancient texts, poring over dusty tomes filled with forgotten runes and arcane symbols. He'd mastered spells of illumination, charms of mending, and even a particularly stubborn enchantment that kept his teacups perpetually warm. But power, true, formidable power, had always eluded him. He yearned for something more, something that would fill the quiet emptiness of his tower, the echoing silence of his days. He imagined a powerful entity, a demon perhaps bound to his will, answering his questions, a companion of sorts, even if a terrifying one. He told himself it was for research, for knowledge, but deep down he craved presence. Tonight was the night the stars aligned, or so his charts promised. The air in his summoning chamber, usually cool and damp, hummed with a nervous energy. Eldrin had meticulously drawn the intricate circle on the stone floor, each line glowing faintly with stored magical energy. Candles specially crafted from rare moon wax flickered around the perimeter, casting dancing shadows that made the room feel both ancient and alive. Incense, a heady mix of dragon's blood and frankincense, curled upwards in thick plumes, stinging his eyes and filling his lungs. He clutched his grimoire, a heavy, leather-bound book with brittle pages, his knuckles white. His voice, usually soft and a little reedy, resonated with a newfound strength as he began the incantation. The words were old, older than the forest outside, twisting his tongue and vibrating in his chest. Latin, forgotten dialects, whispers from the void. They flowed from him, building in intensity. The air grew thick like wading through warm honey. The candles flared, their flames leaping impossibly high. The glow from the summoning circle pulsed brighter and brighter until Eldrin had to squint. A low hum filled the chamber, growing into a thunderous roar that vibrated through the very stones of the tower. Eldrin felt a surge of raw power, terrifying and exhilarating, washing over him. This was it. He was doing it. He was finally bridging the gap between worlds. The light reached an unbearable crescendo, blinding him. He felt the ancient energies swirl, coalescing at the center of the circle. This was the moment. Demon, a creature of shadow and fury, was about to appear. He braced himself for a hideous shriek, for the stench of brimstone, for the chilling presence of true evil. Tightened his grip on his grimoire, ready to assert his will, ready to bind this powerful entity to his service. Then, with a sound like a cosmic crackle and pop, the light dissipated. The roar died down to a faint ringing in his ears. The air still thrummed, but the oppressive weight was gone. Eldrin blinked, trying to clear his vision, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. At the center of the summoning circle, where a hellish fiend should have stood, was a man. A man unlike any Eldrin had ever seen. He wasn't monstrous, or even particularly menacing. He was dressed in a dazzling white jumpsuit, studded with what looked like hundreds of tiny glittering jewels. A high collar framed a surprisingly handsome face, with dark slicked back hair and sideburns that seemed to defy gravity. He wore a wide, bedazzled belt, and his feet were encased in what looked like white platform boots. The man blinked, disoriented, looking around the strange candlelit room. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, landed on Eldrin. He had a faint, puzzled smile on his lips. "Well, hello there," the man said. His voice is a smooth, rich tone, super summon. He hadn't just botched the spell. He'd spectacularly, inexplicably, epically failed. He had summoned of all things a human being, and not just any human being, but one dressed like he'd just stepped off a stage from some fantastical glittering circus. Who are you?" Eldrin finally managed. his voice a strangled whisper. He felt a blush creep up his neck. All that preparation, all that ancient power. For this the man tilted his head, his smile widening slightly. Me. Name's Elvis Presley, and I gotta say this ain't Vegas. He looked around again, his gaze lingering on the glowing symbols of the summoning circle. One heck of a light show, though. What in tarnation is going on here? Eldrin felt a wave of despair. Elvis Presley. He'd read about historical figures in some of his more modern history texts, but he dismissed them as fanciful tales from another time. Another dimension, perhaps. He was supposed to be summoning a creature of pure darkness, not a flamboyant singer from what sounded like a glorified tavern. His demon summoning spell had somehow pulled a historical pop culture icon across dimensions. This was beyond embarrassment. This was a cosmic screw-up of epic proportion. He rubbed his temples, a headache already beginning to throb behind his eyes. You're not a demon, he stated, the obvious truth hanging heavy in the air. Elvis chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that seemed utterly out of place in Eldrin's somber summoning chamber. Demon? Son? The closest I've ever come to a demon is a bad record deal or a particularly persistent paparazzo. Last I checked, I was just about to order a peanut butter and banana sandwich. He looked down at his bejeweled jumpsuit, then back at Eldrin. This is a mighty fine get-up for a sandwich run, though, don't you think? Eldrin pinched the bridge of his nose. He had no idea what a Vegas was, or a peanut butter and banana sandwich, or a paparazzo. His mind reeled. He, Eldrin, the lonely sorcerer of the Quiet Tower, had summoned Elvis Presley, and it was going to be a long, strange night. He could feel it in his bones. This was definitely not what he had planned. Not even close. His grand plan for a powerful, terrifying companion had landed him with a flashy, confused, and utterly human guest. And the worst part, he had no earthly idea how to send him back. He sighed, a long, weary sound that echoed in the now silent chamber. This was going to require far more magic than he had ever anticipated, and perhaps far more patience. He looked at Elvis, who was now tapping his foot to an unheard rhythm, humming softly. The man seemed remarkably unfazed by his sudden dimensional displacement. Eldrin wondered if he was dreaming, or perhaps if the incense had been more potent than he'd realized. Either way, his carefully planned demonic summoning had just taken a very unexpected and very glittery turn. And somehow, despite the monumental failure, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of curiosity ignited within him. What would Elvis Presley do in a sorcerer's tower? He supposed he was about to find out. The silence that followed Eldrin's sigh was broken only by the gentle hum of leftover magic in the air, and the faint, rhythmic tap of Elvis's platform boot on the stone floor. Elvis, still standing calmly within the shimmering circle, finally spoke again. So, Eldrin, was it? You look a little green around the gills. You sure you're right? Fella, that flash of light was quite something. Could knock a man off his feet. Eldrin blinked, processing the immediate concern in Elvis's voice. Demons, as he understood them, weren't typically concerned with a sorcerer's complexion. I'm fine, he mumbled, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation and his dignity. You're asking too many questions for someone who just appeared out of thin air. Elvis shrugged, his bejeweled shoulders glittering. Well, you summoned me, right? And frankly, I got a few questions of my own, like, where in the name of Graceland am I? Is this some kind of new movie set? 'Cause if it is, the budget's looking a little rustic. He gestured around the dimly lit ancient stone chamber. Eldrin rubbed his temples again. Graceland movie set. This is my summoning chamber, my tower. And you, Mr. Presley, are in a different dimension. A different world entirely. Elvis's eyebrows shot up. He finally stepped out of the summoning circle, his boots making soft thuds on the stone. He walked closer to a table laden with scrolls and arcane implements, picking up a curiously shaped crystal. Different dimension, huh? Well, I've heard some wild pitches in my time, but this one takes the cake, you saying you're some kind of wizard like Merlin. His eyes twinkled with a mix of disbelief and genuine fascination. Sorcerer, Eldrin corrected stiffly. And yes, I use magic, and no, I'm not Merlin. He's a legendary figure in your world's mythology. Mythology, huh? Elvis spun the crystal in his fingers, admiring how it caught the candlelight. So this ain't a dream, because I had one heck of a dream once where I was flying in a spaceship made of solid gold. But this feels different, more real. Eldrin watched him, trying to discern any hint of trickery or malice. There was none. Just a man, bewildered but oddly composed, looking around as if he'd just checked into a quirky historical hotel. He seemed genuinely curious, not afraid, which was bewildering in itself. Most people, upon realizing they were in a sorcerer's tower in a different dimension, tended to panic or scream. It's not a dream, Eldrin confirmed, then sighed, and I don't know how to send you back. That got Elvis's attention. You don't? So I'm stuck here. No more peanut butter and banana sandwiches, no more Cadillac rides, no more Love Me Tender on the radio. His voice held a touch of genuine sadness now. Eldrin winced. I'm afraid not. At least not immediately. I was attempting to summon a powerful entity, a demon, to assist me with certain magical endeavors. Clearly, I miscalculated terribly. He felt the humiliation rise again. I've never heard of a peanut butter and banana sandwich, or a Cadillac and Love Me Tender. Sounds like a very odd incantation. Elvis stared at him, then burst out laughing. It wasn't a mocking laugh, but a rich booming sound that filled the cold chamber with warmth. An odd incantation. Oh, man, you're a real character, Eldrin. So, you are telling me you were trying to get yourself a demon, and you got me instead. Is that it? Comments? Well, I gotta say this is quite the story back home. Folks'll never believe it, assuming I ever get back home. He looked around the tower again, his gaze taking in the dusty shelves, the bubbling cauldrons in a corner, the faint glow of runes carved into the walls. So, Eldrin, my wizard friend, what do we do now? You got a spare bed. This jumpsuit ain't exactly pajamas. Eldrin was taken aback by the practicality and the casual acceptance. A bed. Yes, of course. My guest chambers are rudimentary but clean. He led Elvis out of the summoning chamber and up a winding stone staircase. This tower isn't accustomed to guests. Looks like it could use some company, Elvis remarked, his eyes sweeping over the sparse, functional living spaces. He paused at an open window, peering out at the moonlit forest. Pretty quiet out here. Reminds me a little of the country back in Tennessee, just without the power lines and the paved roads. Eldrin showed him to a small stone-walled room with a simple cot, a basin, and a wooden chest. Forgive the lack of amenities. I live a rather solitary life. Elvis ran a hand over the rust-spun blanket on the cot. Don't you worry about it, son. I've slept in worse places, believe you me. This ain't exactly the Hilton, but it'll do. He then looked at Eldrin, a more serious expression on his face. So you really think you can't send me back like ever? Eldrin fidgeted. I don't know. The spell I used was of incredible power and complexity. The fact that it pulled you here instead of a demon suggests a profound anomaly. I would need to study, research. It could take weeks, months. Elvis let out a long breath. Well, shoot. That's a pickle. But hey, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, right? No use crying over spilled milk, especially when you're stuck in another dimension. He then flashed Eldrin a wide, reassuring grin. Looks like you got yourself a new roommate, Eldrin, and I gotta tell you, I'm a lot less trouble than a demon unless you consider a craving for fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches to be demonic. Eldrin stared, still reeling. This man, Elvis Presley, had just had his entire reality upended, and he was cracking jokes and offering comfort. It was utterly disarming. He was supposed to be the powerful sorcerer, the one in control. Yet here he was, feeling like the lost one, while a misplaced pop star was taking it all in stride. I suppose, Eldrin stammered, feeling a strange mix of exasperation and reluctant intrigue. This was going to be an experience, that much was certain. He had expected a horrifying beast. He had received a bewildered but charming human. And perhaps, Eldrin thought as he watched Elvis hum a little tune while checking the softness of his cot, this was a far less dangerous situation, even if it was infinitely more bizarre. The next morning, Eldrin woke with a groan, not because of a bad dream, but because the absurdity of reality pressed down on him. Elvis Presley was in his tower. Elvis Presley, the legendary figure from Tales of Another World, was likely in the guest room right down the hall, possibly humming. He'd gone to bed feeling a profound sense of failure, yet also a strange nervous energy. He dragged himself to his small kitchen, a room usually filled with the quiet sizzle of a simple breakfast and the comforting scent of herbs. Today, however, the air already carried a faint, unfamiliar aroma. As he entered, he found Elvis still in his glittering jumpsuit, peering curiously into Eldrin's stew pot. "Morning, Eldrin. Hope you don't mind, but I was a little hungry. This gruel, is that what you call it? Smells a little bland, but a man's gotta eat." Elvis had managed to find a wooden spoon and was stirring the contents of the pot. Eldrin stared. "You were hungry. How did you? Did you go through my pantry?" "Well, you gotta eat, right?" Elvis replied, completely unruffled. "I just found some of these dried things, oats, you call them, and some water. Figured I could whip something up back home. I had a cook who could make anything. Best fried chicken you ever tasted. Of course, no peanut butter, no bananas, no bacon, no syrup. Here, man, this world is missing out on some vital food groups." Eldrin blinked at the rapid-fire culinary lecture. "Those are breakfast oats," he explained, feeling a headache. "And yes, you're welcome to them, but you're still in that outfit?" Elvis looked down at his jumpsuit. "Oh, this is my stage outfit. It's kinda all I got. Didn't exactly pack a suitcase for my interdimensional trip." He chuckled, "Though I gotta say it's pretty comfortable for walking around a wizard's tower. Good for dancing, too." He then did a little two-step right there in Eldrin's kitchen, making the tiny jewels on his suit shimmer in the faint morning light. Eldrin watched the impromptu performance, a mixture of bewilderment and grudging amusement on his face. He poured himself a mug of herbal tea, watching Elvis try to identify various ingredients in his meager pantry. So Eldrin began. "Since you're here and I can't immediately send you back, what exactly do you do?" "Do?" Elvis paused, holding up a small pouch of dried chamomile. "Well, I sing mostly, play a little guitar, make movies. Shake my hips a little." He demonstrated the last part with a small, fluid movement that Eldrin found surprisingly graceful, even in the confines of his kitchen. "Used to be pretty famous back home, the king. They called me." Eldrin raised an eyebrow. "The king?" He had read about actual kings, rulers of lands. This man seemed an unlikely monarch. Elvis laughed again. The king of rock and roll. It's a type of music. You probably haven't heard of it. Kinda loud, makes you want to dance." He sighed. "I guess I don't really do much here. No stages, no crowds, just you and me, and a whole lot of trees." A strange thought struck Eldrin. "You miss it, don't you? Your world." Elvis's smile faded a little, and a hint of genuine wistfulness entered his eyes. "Yeah, Eldrin, I do. My family, my friends, the music, it's all I've ever known. It's a mighty strange feeling waking up and everything you ever knew is just gone." Poof, he snapped his fingers. "But hey, I'm here now. No use dwelling on what can't be changed, right? My mama always said, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And right now, I got a whole lot of lemons." He gestured around Eldrin's kitchen. The simple, honest optimism was infectious. He'd spend years dwelling on what he lacked, what he couldn't do. Here was a man who had lost everything familiar, yet still looked for the lemonade. Over the next few days, Eldrin's solitary routine was utterly spectacularly disrupted. Elvis was everywhere. He explored the tower with the enthusiasm of a child in a new toy store, though his comments often highlighted its eccentricities. "You got a whole library in here." "Eldrin, man, this is a lot of books. You read all these?" Elvis would ask, pulling a heavy tome from a shelf and flipping through the ancient script with a confused but interested expression. He'd occasionally hum little tunes as he wandered melodies unlike anything Eldrin had ever heard, rhythmic and catchy. Elvis also had an uncanny knack for finding things Eldrin had misplaced for weeks or even years. "Hey, Eldrin, you looking for that fancy quill you were cussing about yesterday? Found it under a pile of maps in your study." Or, "Is this what you use to make your fire, this kindling stuff? It's kind of wet. Maybe we should stack it over by the hearth to dry out." Eldrin, initially annoyed by the intrusion, found himself slowly, grudgingly appreciating it. His home was certainly livelier. Elvis would try to help him with mundane tasks, often comically failing due to his unfamiliarity with Eldrin's world. But his cheerful persistence was undeniable. He once tried to fix Eldrin's perpetually dripping faucet with a butter knife, and a prayer resulting in Eldrin having to use a mending charm and a stern lecture on the dangers of plumbing for the uninitiated. Eldrin found himself explaining the concept of indoor water systems, and then, surprisingly, listening as Elvis explained how his own mansion, Graceland, had 23 toilets. Eldrin had never imagined such a thing. One afternoon, Eldrin was struggling with a particularly complex brewing of a healing potion. He was muttering incantations, stirring the cauldron with focused intensity, when Elvis wandered in. "That smells interesting, Eldrin," Elvis said, wrinkling his nose good-naturedly. "What's it for?" "A cure for boredom?" Eldrin sighed. "It's a potion for common ailments. The last ingredient is proving elusive to mix properly." Elvis leaned over the cauldron, peering into the bubbling green liquid. "Huh. You know, back in the army when we were out in the field, sometimes the cooks would use a little rhythm to get things moving, like stirring batter. You ever try stirring to a beat?" Eldrin stared. "A beat for a potion?" "Yeah, a rhythm," Elvis said, and without thinking he started to hum a gentle rhythmic tune, swaying slightly, and then began to tap his hand on the side of the cauldron in time with the hum. Eldrin, against his better judgment, found himself mimicking the motion with his stirring spoon. Slowly, steadily, Eldrin stirred, following Elvis's impromptu rhythm. To his astonishment, the swirling green liquid in the cauldron began to coalesce, the elusive ingredient dissolving. Eldrin stopped, wide-eyed. It worked. "The potion is perfect," Elvis grinned, his blue eyes sparkling. "Well, what do you know? Guess some things are universal, huh? A good beat can fix just about anything." Eldrin looked at the now perfectly blended potion, then at Elvis. He had summoned a pop star instead of a demon, and the pop star had just helped him with alchemy. This was beyond odd, and yet Eldrin felt a strange sensation, one he hadn't experienced in a very long time. A genuine smile touching his lips. Maybe, just maybe, this cosmic screw-up wasn't entirely a disaster. It was still wildly inconvenient, but perhaps not as lonely days turned into weeks. Eldrin, surprisingly, found himself falling into a peculiar rhythm with his unexpected guest. Tower, once a silent echo of his solitude, now hummed with Elvis's presence. Eldrin would often find himself pausing his spell work to listen to Elvis humming a forgotten melody, or to the rhythmic tap of his foot as he explored some new corner of the library. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of trying to decipher a complex dimensional transit spell, a spell that stubbornly refused to reveal the secret of sending Elvis home, Eldrin slumped in his chair by the hearth. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the silence, usually comforting, felt heavier than usual. Elvis, noticing Eldrin's mood, walked over and sat on a low stool opposite him. He had taken to wearing one of Eldrin's spare, if rather oversized, tunics, finding the glittering jumpsuit a bit impractical for everyday tower life. But even in simple homespun, he still carried an undeniable charisma. "Rough day, huh, Eldrin?" Elvis asked, his voice soft. Eldrin sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The spells are unyielding. It's like trying to catch mist in a net. I simply cannot fathom how to reverse what I've done." He looked at Elvis. "I truly am sorry. I didn't intend to pull you from your world. I was trying to find something powerful, right? A demon," Elvis said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Why a demon, Eldrin? What's so special about a creature from hell that you'd go to all this trouble?" Eldrin hesitated. He rarely spoke of his true motivations to anyone, mostly because there was no one to speak to. But Elvis wasn't just anyone. He was a man from another world, with an easy charm and eyes that seemed to genuinely listen. I wanted power," Eldrin admitted, his voice low. "Not for evil, not for conquest, but I felt insignificant, mind magic while useful for small things. Never felt grand. I wanted to make a difference, to protect this forest, perhaps even a nearby village, from the occasion raiding party. And I was lonely, terribly so. I thought a bound entity, even a terrifying one, would at least be a presence." He gave a wry, self-deprecating chuckle. "I thought it would fill the silence." Elvis listened, his gaze unwavered slightly. "Loneliness, huh? Yeah, I know a little something about that. Even when you're the king and there are thousands of screaming fans, sometimes you can feel like the loneliest man on earth. All that noise and still a quiet in your heart. Seems like you got a presence now, though, Eldrin. Maybe not the one you bargained for, but a presence nonetheless." Eldrin looked at Elvis, truly looked at him. The man from another world, who had every right to be furious or despondent, was offering him understanding, empathy. It was a warmth Eldrin hadn't felt in years, a different kind of magic entirely. "You're surprisingly understanding," Eldrin said, a hint of surprise in his voice. Elvis shrugged. "Well, what's there to understand? You messed up a spell. I got yanked across the universe. Nobody's perfect, but you know what? You seem like a good man. Eldrin, a little quiet. Maybe, and a lot serious. But good you ain't no demon, that's for sure. Unless you're just really, really good at pretending. In which case, you should have been an actor." Eldrin actually laughed, a rare, genuine sound that surprised even himself. "An actor? No, I assure you my skills lie purely in the arcane." "Speaking of arcane," Elvis said, his tone shifting, "you mentioned a village. Are there people out there? Other folks besides you and me?" His eyes lit up with a familiar spark of curiosity and eagerness. Eldrin hesitated. He had avoided the village for years, preferring his solitude, but the thought of introducing Elvis to anyone was bewildering. "Yes, a small village, about half a day's journey through the forest." "Why?" "Why?" Elvis repeated, a big smile spreading across his face. "Eldrin, I'm a people person. I thrive on crowds. I miss seeing new faces, hearing new stories. And honestly, this tower, it's great, but it's starting to feel a little like a very offensive course." Eldrin considered this. Elvis had adapted remarkably well, but he was clearly designed for interaction. He was a performer, a social creature. Keeping him cooped up in the tower indefinitely, even if Eldrin had to research how to send him back, seemed cruel. Besides, the village occasionally needed his healing potions, his weather charms. He hadn't visited in years, simply sending supplies via enchanted carrier pigeon. "The village is simple," Eldrin warned. "They might find your attire and your manner a touch bewildering." "Oh, I can tone it down," Elvis said, patting his simple tunic. "I'm a master of disguise. Well, okay, maybe not. But I can certainly be polite and friendly, and who knows, maybe I could even help out. I'm good with people, Eldrin. I can charm the pants off a rattlesnake, they used to say. Eldrin found himself contemplating the impossible. Taking Elvis to the village, the very thought sent a jolt of anxiety through him. What if they thought Eldrin had summoned a madman? Yet seeing the genuine longing in Elvis's eyes, Eldrin felt a pull he hadn't expected. This was his responsibility. He had pulled Elvis here, and now he had to find a way to make this new strange existence bearable for him. "All right," Eldrin said, surprising himself with the word. "Perhaps we would need to go carefully, and you would need to be discreet. No loud singing, no hip gyrations." Elvis's eyes lit up. "You got it, boss. Discreet as a shadow, quiet as a church mouse. I can be whatever you need me to be. Eldrin, just point me towards some folks." He leaned back, a contented hum spreading across his face. He had sought a powerful entity to fill his loneliness. He had received a man with a booming laugh, an endless supply of good cheer, and a knack for making potions brew faster. He still had no idea how to send Elvis home. But perhaps, just perhaps, that wasn't the most pressing problem anymore. The silence in his heart had begun to fill, not with terrifying power, but with something far more precious: companionship. The decision to visit the village weighed heavily on Eldrin. He spent the next few days preparing not just supplies for the journey, but also himself mentally. Conjured a simple dark cloak for Elvis, hoping it would hide the telltale glitter of the jumpsuit underneath. Elvis, surprisingly, seemed excited by the prospect of a disguised mission. "This is like a secret agent movie, Eldrin," he'd whispered, pulling the hood low over his eyes and trying to walk with a mysterious swagger that was utterly ruined by his distinctive rhythmic gait. "We gotta blend in, right? Act natural. Just don't attract attention," Eldrin advised for the 10th time. "And try not to use any of your expressions or your strange sayings. They won't understand." "You got it, boss," Elvis had said, but Eldrin noticed a sly twinkle in his eye. He had a feeling that discreet might be a subjective term for Elvis Presley. On the appointed morning, Eldrin double-checked his satchel, filled with healing salves, a few enchanted trinkets for trading, and a small, magically chilled flask of water. Elvis, looking slightly like a very well-dressed shadow in his dark cloak, bounced on the balls of his feet. "Ready to roll, Eldrin," he announced, his voice a little too loud for Eldrin's liking. "Keep your voice down," Eldrin hissed, then opened the secret back entrance to the tower, a camouflage door that blended perfectly with the forest wall. "We proceed quietly." The forest was Eldrin's sanctuary, a place of peace and power. The towering trees, the dappled sunlight, the rustle of leaves underfoot, it was all familiar and comforting. Elvis, however, saw it differently. "Man, this place is huge," he exclaimed, looking up at the canopy. "You got bears out here, or like giant squirrels?" "We have bears, yes," Eldrin replied, keeping his voice even. "And various other creatures most keep to themselves, just don't stray from the path." Elvis walked a few paces ahead, his cloak swirling. He seemed to take genuine joy in the simple act of walking through the woods, occasionally stopping to marvel at a particularly vibrant mushroom or a cleverly hidden bird's nest. He even tried to teach a squirrel to stay, much to Eldrin's exasperation and the squirrel's utter confusion. "You know, Eldrin, this is kinda nice," Elvis mused as they walked. "Quiet, peaceful. Back home, it was always noise, cameras flashing, crowds screaming, record exec yelling. Sometimes I just wanted to get away from it all, just breathe." He took a deep breath of the crisp forest air. "This is good breathing." Eldrin looked at Elvis, a new understanding dawning on him. For all his fame and charisma, Elvis had also lived a life under immense pressure, constantly in the spotlight. Perhaps this strange, quiet world offered him a different kind of freedom. As they neared the edge of the forest, the familiar scent of wood smoke and damp earth reached them, signaling the proximity of the village. Eldrin felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He was a recluse by nature, and mingling with villagers, even familiar ones, was always a challenge. But now with Elvis... "All right, Elvis," Eldrin whispered, stopping at the tree line. "The village is just beyond these trees, remember? Quiet, polite, and no mention of your past life." Elvis gave him a thumbs up, a gesture Eldrin had learned meant understood and agreed. They emerged from the forest path into a small clearing and then onto a dusty track that led to the village of Oakhaven. It was a cluster of timber-framed houses with thatched roofs, a small market square, and a sturdy stone church. Children were playing in the dirt, chasing a dog, their laughter echoing in the afternoon air. Farmers were tending to their fields nearby, and the blacksmith's hammer rang out rhythmically. Eldrin pulled his own hood up higher, as he usually did, to minimize recognition. He preferred to be seen as the sorcerer from the tower, rather than Eldrin, the awkward hermit. As they walked towards the market square, a few villagers glanced their way. A couple of children pointed, whispering about the man from the tower. Eldrin ignored them, heading straight for the apothecary's stall, where he usually traded his potions for mundane supplies. But Elvis, despite his cloak, couldn't help but draw attention. His posture, his confident stride, even the way his cloak seemed to subtly shimmer from the jewels beneath, made him stand out. One of the children, a brave little girl with bright red pigtails, stared at him fascinated. Elvis, seeing her, offered a small, gentle smile, then winked. The girl giggled and immediately ran to tell her friends about the shiny man. Eldrin groaned internally. So much for blending in. At the apothecary's stall, Eldrin began his negotiations with Master Alara, a wizened woman with sharp eyes. "Greetings, Master Alara. I've brought the feverfew drafts you requested." Alara nodded. Her eyes, however, were fixed on Elvis, who stood silently beside Eldrin, hands clasped behind his back, trying his best to look unassuming. "And who might this be, Eldrin?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Eldrin stammered. "This is my apprentice. He's new from a distant land." He hoped distant land would cover another dimension. Elvis, to Eldrin's surprise, bowed slightly. A polite old-world gesture. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Name's Presto. Just Presto." Eldrin nearly choked. Presto. It sounded almost like a magical incantation and a thinly veiled version of his own name. But at least he hadn't said Elvis. Alara's eyebrows raised, but she seemed amused. "Presto, is it? Well, Presto. You've got good manners at least." As Eldrin conducted his business, Elvis simply observed, his blue eyes taking everything in. He watched the baker selling fresh bread, the weaver at her loom, the blacksmith shaping metal. A vendor was playing a simple lute tune, and Elvis's foot began to tap almost imperceptibly under his cloak. Eldrin shot him a warning glance, and Elvis quickly stilled his foot. Suddenly, a commotion erupted across the square. A young boy chasing a runaway piglet tripped and scraped his knee badly, letting out a wail. His mother rushed over, looking distressed. Eldrin, ever the healer, started to move instinctively, reaching for his satchel. But Elvis was faster. Before Eldrin could even utter a healing charm, Elvis was kneeling beside the boy, not reaching for him, but speaking in a soft, soothing voice. "Whoa there, little fella," Elvis said, his voice a warm balm. "That's quite a tumble. Looks like a brave soldier's wound, though you gonna be all right." He didn't touch the boy, but simply met his eyes with a kind, reassuring gaze. He then took a handkerchief from his pocket, a surprisingly clean white one, and gently offered it to the mother. "Here, ma'am, for the boy's knee, and maybe a little something for his spirits." He then began to hum, a soft, wordless melody, a tune Eldrin had never heard, but which was strangely comforting. The boy, still tearful, looked at Elvis, captivated by the gentle voice and the melodic hum. His sobs began to subside. His mother, initially wary of the cloaked stranger, found herself relaxing under Elvis's calming presence. Eldrin, standing a few feet away, watched in astonishment. He would have used a spell, conjured a poultice. Elvis used nothing but his voice, his presence, and a handkerchief. And it was more effective than any simple healing charm Eldrin possessed. The child was still scraped, but his tears had stopped, and he looked almost mesmerized by the apprentice. "Thank you, sir," the mother said, truly grateful. "You have a soothing voice, an angel's touch, almost." Elvis smiled, a genuine, humble smile that Eldrin rarely saw when he was performing for him. "Just glad to help, ma'am. Sometimes a little bit of music and a friendly face is all you need." Eldrin felt a strange swell in his chest. He had intended to gain power, to be important, to help. He had summoned someone who did it effortlessly, without magic, just with pure human kindness. This was an unexpected and profound realization. Elvis wasn't just a burden. He was a unique force, a different kind of magic, entirely. And for the first time in a long time, Eldrin felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this strange accidental summoning was in fact an improvement. The rest of their time in Oakhaven proved to be a series of subtle revelations for Eldrin. While Eldrin haggled over prices for rare herbs and inspected new brewing vessels, Elvis, or Presto, as he was known there, became an unwitting, quiet spectacle. He didn't sing loudly or dance, but his very presence was magnetic. Children, drawn by his gentle eyes and the faint twinkle of his hidden jumpsuit, would cautiously approach him. Elvis, ever the natural with kids, would crouch down and tell them small, fanciful stories he made up on the spot, his voice soft but captivating. He spoke of flying machines and great cities of light from his distant land, weaving tales that were just outlandish enough to be believable to young minds. He'd make them laugh with silly gestures or mimic animal sounds, all while Eldrin tried to conduct serious business. Adults, too, found themselves drawn to him. He offered polite greetings, a kind word here and there, a sympathetic nod when someone spoke of a hardship. He seemed to genuinely care, and that simple act of listening, of being fully present, was something Eldrin realized he rarely offered. Eldrin would often catch snippets of conversation. "That Eldrin's apprentice, Presto, he's got a kind eye, doesn't he?" Or, "Heard him humming the other day, sounded like a summer breeze." At one point, a farmer was struggling to lift a heavy sack of grain onto his cart. Before Eldrin could even consider a levitation charm, Elvis was there, his muscles surprising strong to screws. With a grunt and a grin, he hoisted the sack with ease. "Appreciate that, young man," the farmer panted. "You're a strong one, just trying to help, sir," Elvis replied, wiping his brow. Eldrin, observing all this, felt a mix of awe and bewilderment. He used magic for good deeds, healing, protection, ensuring good harvest. But Elvis, without a single spell, was achieving similar, if not deeper, connections and acts of kindness. It was a different kind of power, entirely one Eldrin was only just beginning to understand. It was the power of pure, unadulterated human connection. As dusk began to settle, Eldrin finished his trading. "We should return to the tower before it gets too dark," he told Elvis. "Eldrin," Elvis said, but he paused, looking around the bustling village square. "You know, this reminds me a little of the fairgrounds back home. Folks coming together, sharing a moment. It's nice." Just then, a small commotion started near the village. "Well?" A young woman, clearly distressed, was speaking quickly to a group of worried villagers. Eldrin recognized her as Lyra, a weaver from the village. "The spring of whispers is drying up," Lyra cried, her voice strained. "Barely trickling. If it stops, the crops will wither, and our drinking water will be gone." The Spring of Whispers was a vital water source for Oakhaven, a sacred place deep in the forest, rumored to be protected by ancient nature spirits. Eldrin had heard the whispers of its weakening flow, but had dismissed it as a natural fluctuation. Now it seemed it was critical. "We must consult the elders," someone shouted. "They will know what to do." Eldrin felt a familiar dread. The elders often called upon him for magical consultation, but this felt like something beyond his current scope. The Spring of Whispers was ancient magic tied to the land itself. Elvis, however, had moved closer, listening intently. The spring is drying up. That sounds like big trouble. Lyra, seeing Eldrin, rushed forward. Eldrin, we need your help. You know the old magic, the spirits of the forest. Can you not persuade the spring to flow again? Eldrin stammered. I will certainly look into it, Lyra. It is a delicate matter. Ancient spirits are not easily persuaded. He honestly had no idea where to even begin. His spells were for mundane problems, not the health of a mythical spring. Elvis, without a word, walked over to Lyra. He didn't speak a single word of magic, didn't make any grand gestures. He simply placed a comforting hand on her arm, his blue eyes radiating genuine concern. Don't you worry now, ma'am, he said, his voice a soft, reassuring balm. This Eldrin here, he's a powerful man. If anyone can figure this out, it's him. And if he needs a little help, well, he's got a partner now, don't he? He gave Eldrin a quick, meaningful look, then smiled at Lyra. We'll do our best, that's all. Anyone can ask. Lyra, still worried, found a sliver of hope in Elvis's words. In his steady gaze, she nodded, wiping a tear from her eye. Thank you, Presto, just thank you. As they began their journey back to the tower, the weight of the villagers' plight pressed on Eldrin. The Spring of Whispers, he muttered. It's legendary. If it fails, Oakhaven is doomed. I should have paid more attention. Well, you know now, Elvis said, his voice surprisingly calm. And you got me to help? What do we do, Eldrin? Do we go out there and sing to the spring? Maybe that'll make it happy. He hummed a soft tune, a playful suggestion, but his eyes were serious. Eldrin looked at him, realizing the bizarre truth of their situation. He, the sorcerer, was the one feeling overwhelmed, while the displaced rock star was ready to tackle a magical environmental crisis with a song. Singing won't work, Elvis Eldrin said, though a tiny part of him wondered. But your presence in the village, your calming words, you gave them hope. Something I often fail to do, even with my magic. Elvis shrugged, his cloak swaying. Just being myself, Eldrin. That's all I know how to do. And what I know is, when folks are hurting, you gotta show up, and you gotta care. Eldrin walked in silence for a while, pondering Elvis's simple wisdom. He had sought power, but Elvis possessed something far more potent. Genuine human connection and compassion. Maybe, just maybe, those were the true ingredients for solving problems, even magical ones. He had a responsibility now, not just to send Elvis home, but to protect this world that Elvis had accidentally stumbled into, and perhaps to learn from the king of rock and roll how to truly be present back in the tower. The light-hearted curiosity that had defined Elvis's stay was replaced by a shared sense of urgency. The drying Spring of Whispers was a tangible threat, and Eldrin felt its weight keenly. He buried himself in ancient texts, searching for any lore or spell that might address the failing spring. Elvis, for his part, tried to help in his own way. He'd bring Eldrin cups of steaming herbal tea, quiet the occasional agitated rustle of a page with a soft hum, or simply sit nearby, his presence a silent support. Anything, Eldrin? Eldrin would shake his head, frustration etched on his face. Texts are vague. They speak of the heart of the land, of ancient pacts. It suggests the problem isn't a simple magical ailment that can be cured with a potion. It's deeper. One morning, as Eldrin was poring over a faded map of the forest, an unexpected disturbance rippled through his protective wards. A faint prickling sensation like static electricity grazed his magical senses. It wasn't a signature of a forest creature nor a lost traveler. It was magic, but not his own, and it felt predatory. Someone's approaching the tower, Eldrin said, his voice tight. He stood moving to a small enchanted orb that shimmered faintly, showing him glimpses of the forest outside. And they're not friendly. Elvis was instantly alert. Trouble-like, bad guys, worse, Eldrin corrected. His eyes narrowed on the orb. He saw a figure emerge from the dense foliage, cloaked in dark, heavy robes, moving with a deliberate, unsettling grace. The air around them seemed to shimmer with ill intent. "Malachor," Eldrin breathed, his face paling. Elvis asked, already sensing the shift in Eldrin's demeanor. "A sorcerer I knew in my youth," Eldrin explained, his voice low and grim. "He'll sense a great magical surge and believe I've succeeded. Or worse, that I've stumbled upon a new source of power." Elvis looked at the orb, seeing the menacing figure approach. "So he thinks you've got a demon in here, and he wants it, or whatever he thinks you got." "Precisely," Eldrin said. He wasn't subtle. He preferred brute force and dark magic, and Elvis, in his presence, was a liability. He was a human with no magical defenses. "Elvis, you must hide," Eldrin instructed, his voice urgent. "Go to the lowest cellar, the one beneath the kitchen. There's a hidden compartment. Do not emerge, no matter what you hear." Elvis's blue eyes widened, but he nodded. "Got it? Basement hidden compartment? Don't come out like a hide-and-seek championship." He started towards the kitchen, but then paused, looking back at Eldrin. "You gonna be okay, Eldrin? This guy looks mean." "I've faced Malachor before," Eldrin said, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "I can hold him off. Just do as I say." Elvis nodded again, then quickly disappeared into the kitchen. Eldrin took a deep breath, marshaling his magical energy. He armed himself with his staff, its crystal tip glowing faintly, and moved to the tower's entrance. A moment later, a powerful wave of dark magic slammed against the tower's main ward, making the very stones tremble. Eldrin braced himself. "Eldrin." Malachor's voice, raspy and resonant with dark power, echoed through the forest. "I sense a potent magic within. You've been busy, old friend. Have you finally bound a true demon? Share your power, and perhaps I will allow you to live." Eldrin stepped onto the small balcony above the main entrance. "Malachor, your obsession still consumes you. There is nothing for you here but failure." Malachor. A gaunt man with eyes like chips of obsidian looked up. A sneer twisted his lips. "Don't play coy, Eldrin. That burst of energy that emanated from this tower. Days ago it spoke of a powerful summoning. Surrender it, or I shall take it by force." Began to conjure a spell, dark energy swirling around his hands, coalescing into crackling bolts of raw power. Eldrin raised his staff, erecting a shimmering shield of pure light around the tower. The first bolts of dark magic exploded against it, sending ripples of force through Eldrin's body. He gritted his teeth, pushing more energy into the shield. This was going to be a battle. Down in the cellar, Elvis heard the explosions, the crackling of magic in the clash of Eldrin's shield. He gripped the rough stone wall of his hidden compartment, his heart pounding. He knew Eldrin was out there fighting for his life, probably protecting him. An accidental guess? He thought of Eldrin's quiet loneliness, of the good man beneath the sorcerer's robes, the man who had brought him tea, explained basic plumbing, and taught him what oats were. He had promised Eldrin he would stay hidden. He had promised, but the sounds of battle, the shouts, the sheer force of the magical struggle made him restless. This wasn't just some movie set anymore. This was real, and Eldrin was in danger. Elvis remembered Eldrin's words. "I was trying to find something. I felt insignificant. I wanted to make a difference." And he remembered Eldrin's fear for him, telling him to hide. Eldrin had chosen to protect him, the stranger, over his own safety. A particularly loud explosion rocked the tower, and Elvis felt the stone walls vibrate. He could hear Eldrin grunt in pain, and a wave of determination mixed with a healthy dose of fear washed over him. He wasn't a sorcerer. He didn't have spells or shields, but he was Elvis Presley. He had faced down angry crowds, demanding managers, and the crushing weight of fame. He had always tried to help those who needed it. "Well now," Elvis muttered to himself, a glint in his eye. "A little hide-and-seek is one thing, but when your friend's in trouble, you gotta show up, even if you're out of your depth." He pushed open the hidden door. Emerging into the cold cellar, he looked around, spotting a few discarded tools, some empty barrels. He wasn't a fighter, but he was resourceful. And he had a feeling that Malachor wasn't ready for a different kind of king. He slowly and carefully made his way up the stairs towards the sounds of the battle. A plan, wild and completely unmagical, beginning to form in his mind. He didn't know what he could do, but he knew. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. Eldrin was struggling. Malachor was relentless, his dark magic potent and aggressive. Eldrin's shields flickered, barely holding against the barrage of shadow bolts and corrupted elemental blasts. He felt exhaustion creeping in, his reserves of magical energy dwindling. "Give up, Eldrin," Malachor sneered, summoning another wave of dark energy. "Your light magic is no match for true power. Surrender your summoned beast, and I will be merciful." "There is no beast," Eldrin retorted, pouring a last of his strength into a retaliatory burst of pure magical force. It struck Malachor's shield, pushing him back a few paces but not breaking through. Just as Malachor was about to unleash his most devastating spell, a voice surprisingly loud and clear cut through the magical clamor. "Hold it right there, fella." Both Eldrin and Malachor paused, turning to see Elvis emerge from the main tower door. He was still wearing the dark cloak, but it was open, revealing the shimmering white jumpsuit underneath. In his hands he held Eldrin's largest, most ornate, and completely non-magical ceremonial gong, which he had clearly dragged from its stand in the library. Malachor's eyes narrowed. "Who is this fool, Eldrin? Is this your beast?" "A man in a ridiculous costume," he scoffed, looking utterly unimpressed. Eldrin stared, aghast. Elvis ignored them both. He took a deep breath, and with a mighty two-handed swing he struck the gong. Bong! The sound wasn't magical, but it was incredibly loud, resonant, and completely unexpected. It echoed through the clearing, momentarily startling Malachor, who flinched. "All right, Malachor, is it?" Elvis said, adjusting his grip on the gong stick. "You're making a whole lot of noise and causing a whole lot of trouble. Eldrin, here. He's a peaceful man. He don't need no bullies messin' with his home." Malachor roared with laughter. "You think a sound will stop me? Mortal fool. You will be dust." He began to conjure a powerful spell, tendrils of black energy reaching towards Elvis. Elvis, instead of cowering, took another deep breath, then struck the gong again. This time, he didn't just strike it, he played it, finding a rhythm. A steady, booming beep-bong, bong, 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 gong. He began to move, swaying his hips, putting his whole body into the rhythm, creating a mesmerizing, almost hypnotic beat with the massive instrument. Malachor's spell wavered. The sheer absurdity of the situation, combined with the unexpected powerful rhythm, seemed to momentarily break his concentration. He stared at Elvis, Malachor muttered, his dark magic flickering. Elvis, now fully in his element, picked up the pace, adding more strikes, more rhythm. He began to hum, then to sing a powerful bluesy growl that built in intensity. He wasn't singing words, just raw sound, pure emotion layered over the booming gong. It wasn't "Love Me Tender." It was primal, energetic, and utterly disorienting. "You ain't seen nothing yet, Paul," Elvis shouted, punctuating his words with another resounding bong. "You think you're powerful. Try standing in front of 10,000 screaming fans who want to rock and roll." The sheer non-magical force of Elvis's personality, combined with the relentless, unconventional rhythm, was having an effect. Malachor, who was used to facing off against arcane shields and fiery blasts, was completely unprepared for this. His dark magic, which thrived on focus and malevolence, struggled against the chaotic human energy. Elvis was radiating, He was disoriented, thrown off balance. Eldrin, seizing the moment, understood. Malachor was vulnerable to the unexpected, to the utterly unmagical. He wasn't used to dealing with pure, unadulterated human force of will. While Elvis kept Malachor bewildered with his rhythmic assault, Eldrin quickly gathered his remaining energy. He didn't conjure a shield or a blast. Instead, he reached for a much more subtle but equally potent form of magic. With a swift incantation, Eldrin began to manipulate the very earth around Malachor. Roots surged from the ground, wrapping around Malachor's ankles. Vines snaked out from the nearby trees, entangling his arms. The earth beneath his feet softened, threatening to swallow him. Malachor roared in frustration, trying to break free, but the rhythmic bong-bong from Elvis kept him off balance, unable to focus his magic. "What is this sorcery?" Malachor yelled, struggling against the earth's grip. "It's the rhythm, Malachor," Elvis yelled back, delivering another thunderous bong that vibrated through Malachor's very bones. "You can't fight the beat." The combination was surprisingly effective. Eldrin's subtle earth, magic empowered by the chaos and distraction, Elvis created completely bound Malachor. Within moments, the dark sorcerer was ensnared, trapped, and utterly furious, but unable to cast a single effective spell. Eldrin, panting, lowered his staff. "It seems, Malachor, that your dark power is no match for an unexpected rhythm." Elvis, still breathing heavily, lowered the gong stick. He looked at Eldrin, then at the bound Malachor, and offered a triumphant, slightly breathless grin. "See, Eldrin told you a good beat could fix anything, even a mean old sorcerer." Eldrin walked over to Malachor, his eyes firm. "You will leave this forest, Malachor, and never return. If you do, I will ensure the trees themselves rise against you." He added a subtle, non-verbal, magical command to the earth, ensuring that Malachor would feel a deep, pervasive unease every time he stepped foot near the forest boundary again. Malachor, bound but still seething, glared at Eldrin, then at Elvis. "This is not over, Eldrin. You have grown weak, relying on this fool." "I have grown wise, Malachor," Eldrin corrected, a new strength in his voice. "I have learned that true strength is not always in the power you wield, but in the unexpected allies you find. Now go." With a final surge of magic, Eldrin released Malachor from the earth's grasp, but not before subtly pushing him out of the ward boundary. Malachor stumbled, snarled, and then, seething with impotent rage, vanished into the trees. Eldrin turned to Elvis, who was now leaning against the gong, still breathing heavily. "Elvis, you saved me. Why did you not stay hidden?" Elvis looked at him, his blue eyes earnest. "You were in trouble, Eldrin. You were protecting me. I couldn't just sit there. Besides," he shrugged, "a little show never hurt nobody except maybe that Malachor fella." "He seemed to hate it," he chuckled. Eldrin felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling far more powerful than any spell. He had sought a demon to protect him, to fill his tower with a presence. Instead, he had found a man who, without magic, had defended him with sheer, unexpected human charisma. It was an alliance Eldrin had never imagined, and one he found himself cherishing. The problem of sending Elvis home still loomed, but suddenly the thought of being alone again felt far more daunting than the challenge of learning a new dimensional spell. The defeat of Malachor brought an unexpected sense of relief and camaraderie to the tower. Eldrin, still recovering from the magical strain, found himself looking at Elvis with newfound respect. Elvis, for his part, was humming happily, still pleased with his performance against the dark sorcerer. "See, Eldrin?" Elvis said, polishing the gong with a piece of cloth. "That's what happens when you bring a knife to a rock and roll fight." He just wasn't ready for it. Eldrin chuckled, a genuine mirthful sound. "Indeed, Elvis, your unique strategy certainly proved effective. I have never encountered a sorcerer so utterly disarmed by a musical instrument." "Well, there's a first time for everything," Elvis grinned. "Now, about that spring, what's the plan, Chief? We gonna go out there and serenade some water spirits?" The mention of the Spring of Whispers brought Eldrin back to the more pressing matter. "I've been studying the ancient texts about the spring," Eldrin explained, leading Elvis to his study table covered in scrolls. "Not drying up due to a physical cause. The texts speak of a breach in the harmony, a disharmony between the land and the people. It's subtle, but over time, it drains the life from the spring." "Disharmony, huh?" Elvis mused. "Like folks ain't getting along. It's a spiritual malaise, a growing apathy, a lack of connection to the land, to each other. The villagers have become too focused on their own small worries, their own grievances. They've forgotten the old ways of communal celebration, of reverence for nature. This, the texts say, slowly starves the spring of the emotional energy it needs to thrive." Elvis nodded slowly. "I get that back home. Sometimes folks get so wrapped up in their own troubles they forget to look out for their neighbors or listen to a good tune. What's the cure?" Eldrin pointed to a faded diagram in an old book. "Texts speak of a great gathering, a communal act of unity and reverence, a grand gesture of collective emotion to rekindle the spring spirit, but it must be genuine from the heart. And it needs a focal point, something to draw everyone together." "A focal point, huh?" Elvis's eyes lit up. "Perhaps, but it cannot be a mere performance. Elvis, it must be a shared experience, a moment of profound connection, something that reminds them of their bonds, their joy, their shared existence." And back at Eldrin. "Eldrin, I think I know just the thing. You said you needed something to draw everyone together, right? Something to remind them of joy. What if I sing?" Eldrin stared. "Sing, Elvis. Your music is from another dimension. They wouldn't understand it." "They don't have to understand the words, Eldrin," Elvis said, a deep conviction in his voice. "Music, true music, it ain't about the words, it's about the feeling. It's about rhythm, about soul. It gets into your feet, into your heart. It makes you feel alive, together." He looked at Eldrin earnestly. "I can reach him, Eldrin. I can connect with him. I know how to make people feel joy." Eldrin felt a wave of uncertainty, then a surge of hope. He had spent his life dealing with ancient, logical magic. It was a terrifying, yet exhilarating thought. His logical mind screamed that it was preposterous. But his heart, which had begun to beat a little stronger since Elvis's arrival, Alacor had been defeated by the unexpected. Perhaps the spring could be healed by it too. "It's a huge risk," Elvis Eldrin warned. "If it fails, the spring will die. Okay, then it will suffer." "Eldrin, sometimes you gotta take a leap of faith. I've seen it work 1,000 times. People, when they hear music that touches them, they open up. They remember what it feels like to be human, to be part of something bigger." Eldrin looked at the intricate diagram of the ritual, then at Elvis's determined face. He thought of the village's plight, of the children's laughter, and of Elvis's genuine desire to help. He had sought power, but Elvis was offering something more profound, a chance to truly make a difference, not just with magic, but with heart. "All right," Eldrin said, making the decision. "We will do it. A great gathering, he will be the focal point. I will prepare a reinforcing charm to channel the collective energy into the spring. We will set up in the clearing near the spring itself." Elvis's face broke into a radiant smile. "That's my Eldrin. You won't regret it, partner. We're going to give these folks a show they'll never forget." Over the next few days, Eldrin quietly spread the word through Oakhaven, inviting everyone to a celebration of the spring at the clearing near the dwindling water source. He spoke of renewing the land's vitality, of communal spirit. He didn't mention Elvis directly, simply promising a unique event. The day of the gathering dawned clear and bright. Villagers, curious and a little hopeful, began to arrive. Eldrin had worked tirelessly, enchanting the clearing, setting up a small temporary stage and preparing a complex channeling array around the spring itself. When all were gathered, Eldrin stepped forward. "Friends, villagers of Oakhaven," he began, his voice amplified by a subtle charm. "We are here today to rekindle the spirit of the Spring of Whispers. It requires not just my magic, but our unity, our joy, our shared spirit." He then gestured towards the small state. "Tonight, we have a guest from a far-off land who will help us remember the joy in our hearts." Elvis, now back in his faux glittering white jumpsuit, stepped onto the stage. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Children pointed their eyes wide with wonder at the sparkling stranger. Adults murmured, some wary, some fascinated. Elvis took a deep breath, looked out at the faces, and then, without a microphone or amplified sound, he began to sing. His voice, naturally powerful and resonant, filled the clearing. It was a slow, soulful melody, a song Eldrin had never heard. But its raw emotion was undeniable. It wasn't loud, not at first. It was a gentle invitation. As Elvis sang, he moved, not wild gyrations, but subtle fluid movements, a sway of his hips, a tilt of his head, a gesture of his hand. He poured every ounce of his being into the music, into the connection. Eldrin, standing near the spring, began to channel the gathering energy. Feeling the subtle shift in the air as more and more villagers became captivated, the children, unable to resist, began to sway. Soon heads were bobbing, and little smiles appeared on weary faces. Elvis's voice grew stronger, the song building in tempo and passion. He was singing about love, about life, about simple joys. Even though the words were alien, the emotions were universal. Eldrin watched, mesmerized. The villagers were not just listening, they were participating. Their collective energy, their newfound joy began to pour into the channeling array, flowing like a visible current towards the spring. The water in the spring, which had been reduced to a mere trickle, began to bubble. A faint ethereal glow emanated from its depths. Elvis hit a particularly powerful note, his voice soaring, his movements more pronounced, yet still graceful. The entire clearing was now swaying, some humming along, others wiping away tears of forgotten joy. Eldrin felt a profound sense of rightness. This wasn't magic of spells and incantations. This was the magic of humanity. As Elvis reached the song's climax, the spring pulsed with light, and then with a joyful gurgle, water burst forth, flowing freely, once more clearer and stronger than it had been in years. Cheer erupted from the villagers, a sound of relief and pure, unadulterated happiness. Elvis finished the song, his last note lingering in the air, a perfect silence following. He stood there, breathing heavily, tears in his own eyes, a triumphant smile on his face. The villagers rushed forward, not to him, but to the spring, laughing, splashing, celebrating. Eldrin walked over to Elvis, a profound sense of awe on his face. "Elvis," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you did it. You saved them without a single spell." Elvis looked at the thriving spring, then back at Eldrin, his blue eyes shimmering. "It wasn't me, Eldrin, it was them. I just gave them a reason to remember what they had, and you, Eldrin, you believed in me." Paused, a different kind of solemnity entering his voice. "So, Eldrin, now that the spring is well, and Malachor is gone, what happens now? Can you send me home?" Eldrin looked at Elvis, then at the happy villagers, then at his own hand, which instinctively reached out and clapped Elvis's shoulder. He thought of his lonely tower, of the empty silence he used to endure. He thought of the laughter, the music, the camaraderie Elvis had brought into his life. He had spent weeks, months, years trying to figure out how to send Elvis back. But now, faced with the choice, Eldrin realized he didn't want him to leave. "Elvis," Eldrin said, his voice soft but firm, I believe I could find a way to send you back. It would be difficult, dangerous even, and it would take time. But," he looked around the vibrant, joyful clearing, "but perhaps, just perhaps, you were summoned here for a reason, not to be a demon, but to be exactly who you are. And perhaps I am not so lonely anymore. And neither are they. Eldrin looked at Elvis, a genuine heartfelt question in his eyes. What if you stayed? The final choice, the ultimate confrontation, wasn't with a foe, but with a new path. And Eldrin realized in that moment that the answer was already shining brightly in front of him. Elvis stared at Eldrin, his expression unreadable for a moment. Cheering of the villagers still celebrating the revived spring faded into the background. Eldrin's question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Stay? Elvis finally echoed, his voice a quiet whisper. You mean stay here in this world? With you? Eldrin nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. Yes, if you wished it. I know it is not your home, and I would never force you, but I have learned a great deal since you arrived. This tower, my life, it is no longer so empty, and you have brought so much good to this land, to these people, without even trying. You are not a demon, Elvis, but you are powerful, in a way I never... Elvis looked out at the joyous crowd, then at the now gushing spring of whispers. A slow smile began to spread across his face, not the flashy grin of a performer, but a soft, genuine expression of contentment. He thought of his old life, the fame, the pressure, the constant scrutiny. He missed parts of it, yes, but he had also often craved a simpler existence, a place where he could just be himself, not the king. You know, Eldrin, Elvis said, turning back to the sorcerer, his blue eyes twinkling. I gotta be honest, this place ain't got no peanut butter and banana sandwiches. And the internet? Forget about it. No Cadillacs, no guitars, no screaming fans. But it's got something else. It's got a good heart, and it's got you, Eldrin. You are a good man, a little weird with all the magic stuff, but a good man. Clapped Eldrin on the shoulder, a familiar, comforting gesture. And you know what I always said, I wanted to make people happy. Didn't matter if it was 1,000,000 people in a stadium or just one lonely soul. I think I can do some good here. Maybe even teach these folks a thing or two about good music once they're ready for it. Eldrin felt a wave of relief wash over him, so profound, it nearly made him dizzy. You'll stay, truly. Yeah, Eldrin, Elvis confirmed, his voice firm. I'll stay. Looks like your cosmic wrong number turned out to be a mighty fine connection. After all, what do you say, partner? Ready to find out what kind of trouble we can get into next? And so the strange, heartwarming chapter of Eldrin the Sorcerer and Elvis the Accidental Dimensional Traveler began anew. In the weeks and months that followed, life in Eldrin's tower was transformed. The gloomy, dust-filled rooms began to reflect Elvis's vibrant personality. He couldn't resist. He rearranged the library, much to Eldrin's initial dismay. Adding comfortable cushions, he had somehow convinced a skeptical villager to trade for some improvised folk songs. He started a small, surprisingly flourishing herb garden outside the tower, claiming he had a green thumb. He even began to experiment in Eldrin's kitchen, trying to recreate some of his favorite dishes with Eldrin's limited ingredients, leading to some truly bizarre but often surprisingly tasty concoctions. Eldrin, initially resistant to these changes, found himself embracing them. He chuckled more often, he worried less. He even found himself humming some of Elvis's tunes, much to Elvis's delight. The loneliness that had plagued him for so long was a distant memory. The tower was filled with life, with laughter, with the constant cheerful presence of the king. Elvis, meanwhile, slowly but surely introduced Oakhaven to his unique brand of magic. He became a beloved figure in the village known as Presto, the kind stranger from the distant land. He taught the children simple games from his world, offered advice to farmers, often surprisingly practical, and his spontaneous, soft hums would often lift spirits. He never performed a full concert, but his presence, his easy charm, and his unwavering kindness were a constant source of joy. He'd occasionally help Eldrin with his magic too, albeit in unconventional ways. When Eldrin was trying to mend a cracked stone in the tower wall, Elvis suggested they try singing to it. Eldrin, skeptical, humored him. As Elvis sang a heartfelt ballad, Eldrin channeled his mending charm, and the stone flowed together more smoothly, more perfectly than any time before. It was as if the emotional resonance of the music somehow aligned with the magical energy, creating a stronger effect. Eldrin still practiced his magic, but his focus had shifted. He no longer sought grand power for its own sake. Instead, he used his skills to genuinely help the villagers. Often with Elvis by his side, together they made a formidable if utterly bizarre team. Eldrin, the quiet magic wielder, and Elvis, the manic man of heart, working in harmony. One sunny afternoon, Eldrin found Elvis sitting by the now overflowing spring of whispers, strumming a simple, rustic lute he'd acquired from a traveling merchant. Elvis had quickly mastered the unfamiliar instrument, adapting his rock and roll style to its folksy sound. He was singing a new song, one he'd written for this world, about the beauty of the forest and the kindness of its people. Villagers were gathered around, listening, their faces peaceful and content. Children danced freely, their laughter ringing through the clearing. The air vibrated not just with magic, but with joy. Eldrin walked up to Elvis, a rare, wide smile on his face. "That's a beautiful song, Elvis. Just trying to spread a little joy, Eldrin. This world, it's got a good beat. You just gotta find it. And this old lute, it ain't no guitar, but it sure can sing." Eldrin looked at the thriving spring, at the happy faces of the villagers, at the light in Elvis's eyes. He thought of the demon he had originally sought to summon, a creature of darkness and power. And he thought of the man sitting beside him, dressed in his ridiculous glittering jumpsuit, playing a simple lute, filling the world with light and music. He had expected a formidable companion, a terrifying presence to fill his loneliness. He had received Elvis Presley, and it was a vast, immeasurable improvement. His life was no longer about escaping solitude, but about embracing a newfound, vibrant companionship. Power he had truly craved, he realized, wasn't in ancient spells or bound entities, but in the simple, profound magic of human connection and a little bit of rock and roll. And in the quiet forest tower, a new harmony had truly begun.